This is the Comics Alternative, episode 292, a look at the September Previews catalog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gwen, and we're two people with PhDs talking about comics.
That's right. And on this episode, Gwen and I are going to look through the September Previews catalog. And as with all of our preview shows, you can bet that there's a lot that we want to bring up. But before we get to that, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by those great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off at the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts will be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some mind-blowing specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover, but every now and again you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
Derek, most of the publishers that we're going to be talking about today have wonderful bundles every month. And for those of you who listen to our Young Readers show, you'll know that a lot of those DC titles that Derek is going to talk about today, and a lot of the titles that I'll be talking about today for Young Readers are also usually available either in bundles or individually for as much as 30 to 50% off the cover price.
That's right, Gwen. And, our listeners can rest assured that I think every single thing that we're going to bring up today will be available at impressive discounts at Discount Comic Book Service. Be sure to check out their website, dcbservice.com, because they will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please do send them an email and tell them that Gwen and Derek sent you.
That's right.
Well, Gwen, I know we have a lot to talk about, this being a preview show especially. But before we get into the September catalog, we have some mail from a listener.
Woohoo!
Mail time. Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
And what Mailbox brings us today is actually an email from one of the people behind PL Studio. If our listeners remember, last week, Gwen, you and I did a publisher spotlight on PL Studio where we looked at a ton of books. Basically, for the most part, their outlet over the past year and a half. And Patrick Crotty got in touch with us, and he wrote, "Hi, Derek. The podcast was a real nice listen. It was really interesting to hear your perspective on the books and how you interpreted them. We appreciate that you took the time to read through the books and give us a spotlight. I do have some feedback to give you, though." Okay, and one of the first things he mentions is that we mispronounced a number of names, which you and I were aware that we probably did. And one of the things I recall us doing throughout that episode is kind of preemptively apologizing for the possible mispronunciation of some of the names. And unfortunately, that happens. And so, again, we apologize to any of the creators whose names we mispronounced. But, something that our old co-host Paul used to mention is that he himself was used to having his name mispronounced by people all the time, calling him Paul Lay instead of Paul Lai. And, with me, people, I can't remember the number of times that people call me Derek Royale. It's like, is there an E on the end?
That sounds very sophisticated, though, Derek.
Yeah. But he goes on with a couple of more points. Patrick writes, Yuri on Evangeline, which is actually one of his books that he written, is a fan comic based on two well-known anime franchises, Yuri on Ice and Neon Genesis Evangelion. The fact that this was missed is very misleading. We didn't mean to be misleading. And I would definitely look those two shows up just so you guys will be in the know. It's essentially like seeing a fan comic about Star Wars and the Hunger Games and missing those references. I don't want people to think that I am plagiarizing those characters and stories because, in fact, it's a little fan comic we did on the side. So, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't know about that those two anime franchises, Yuri on Ice or Neon Genesis Evangelion. But, I think things like Star Wars and Hunger Games are much more in the public pop culture sphere than these franchises of anime. But now that we know this, we could look that up. And something else that Patrick points out is the other big note is that Junkie, which Gwen, you discussed, is not a comic. And I don't know how the both of you managed to think it was a comic. Junkie is an art book showcasing the work of Singelin. Again, I'm not sure how you pronounce that last name, who is a well-known French artist with a book coming out by First Second this year. The text throughout the book is just an interview with an artist. Also, the book is a reprint. The original release was 2 years ago in conjunction with our Kickstarter. And then he says, best, Patrick. Now, I understand about the Yuri on Evangelion. We didn't know about the anime. I don't know if that would have made much of a difference in terms of our appreciation or interpretation, especially since we didn't have the opportunity to talk much in detail about that because we were looking at so many texts.
Right.
The thing about Junkie, though, I guess our understanding and definition of comics is a little broader. Technically, it's not narrative comic. And we did point that out on the show when we were talking about Junkie. But given its nature, I would not have a problem with calling this a comic or, if you would, a sketchbook comic in some way. But to me, the important point is that we did discuss it, and you went into quite a bit of detail about that, Gwen. So, I want to thank Patrick for getting in touch with us and pointing out some of the things that, we weren't entirely too clear on when it comes to those books. But again, you and I looked at a lot of texts last week.
Right. And I also think that like Junkie, for instance, would be really, really interesting for other comics creators, for people who are interested in process, because as we talked about, there's a lot of artist commentary there, but what the artist is commenting on are comics. And, but I understand, I think a lot of times people conflate the concept of narrative with comics.
Right.
In the US, we call comics the medium. We look at, and I guess we should have called this a sketchbook, which that's very helpful actually to know that. And maybe that will be something that they will put into their publicity about it as well. But it was a sketchbook that's a collection of comics with commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
or at least what
point.
we would call in this country comics with commentary. So
that's right. Well, Gwen, let's get into the heart of this episode for this week, and that is looking through the September Previews catalog. And I know that you have shared your list with me. I've shared mine with you. And we do have quite a bit of overlap in terms of things that we're interested in. And I think we both start at the same place, right?
Right, exactly, with Bitterroot #1.
Yeah, this is on page 40 of the September catalog.
And it's with Image Comics, of course, starting at the beginning. And Derek, this series really interests me because it's set in 1920s Harlem, which is an era that I'm particularly interested in as a scholar and reader. And but it brings the supernatural to Harlem in the 1920s. Part of the script reads, in the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance is in full swing, and only the Sangaree family can save New York and the world from the supernatural forces threatening to destroy humanity. But the once great family of monster hunters has been torn apart by tragedies and conflicting moral codes. Now, we got to, read through some of the sample pages, and while that sounds pretty heavy, there's a lot of comedy that I'm noticing in at least the previews that we're looking at here as well. And it looks to me as if this is going to be also a very rich set of character studies.
Yeah. And we should mention that the writer of this series, the writers, David F. Walker and Chuck Brown, Sanford Green is the artist. I'm interested in this one, although I do have a question, and I don't get any potential answer from the solicit. What is it about Harlem in the 1920s, during the Harlem Renaissance, that suggests supernatural. In other words, I'm wondering why set this in 1920s Harlem? And maybe in this first issue, we'll get some answer to that question. But I just kind of wondered when I read this solicit, it's like, okay, Harlem, supernatural. What is it about the Harlem Renaissance that causes or brings about this idea for supernatural forces threatening to destroy Harlem and the world? I don't know, but I guess we'll see with this first issue.
If you want to explore a particular time period, and especially one that has been deeply underexplored in American popular culture, then maybe the rationale is as simple as that: exposing readers, especially younger readers, to a time and a place that's been really important in American history, but has sometimes been neglected in comics. But it'll be interesting to see what the tie-in is. I really love these series if they can carefully weave the history of the time period, the sort of create a very definite feeling of the time period, but then weave in what they want to with the supernatural. So it should be really interesting to see sort of what they end up doing, and as you say, what the backstory is going to be. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that. Now, I next go to page 44. And this is another number one. And as we have most months, there is a plethora of new series number ones coming out of Image. Some of them appear to be limited series. Some are ongoing. This one is titled Outer Darkness, and it is written by John Layman, which is the main reason I'm interested in this. And the artist is Afu Chan. You know, if this weren't written by John Layman, I don't know if I would highlight it because, this is something that Paul and I have discussed on a couple of past preview shows, is that both of us have a sense that, how do I put this? That with Image comics, with new Image releases, they seem to be, I don't want to say the same thing over and over again, but fairly, and again, I don't want to say formulaic, but somewhat predictable in terms of what they are in terms of, let's say, sci-fi or fantasy. And I don't want to say it seems like the same thing over and over again, but sometimes I get that feeling. And I got that feeling looking through the Image section in the September catalog. So had Layman not been the writer of this, and, he's best known for the co-creator of Chew, which I absolutely loved, another Image comic. I don't know if I would highlight this, but this, the solicit reads, mankind has colonized the galaxy, but during our interstellar travels, we discovered a terrifying secret out in the outer darkness. That's the title of space. Join Captain Joshua Rigg and the crew of the starship Sharon as they encounter demonic possession, hauntings, cosmic horror, and more. So this is like, I don't know, horror in space. It just seems, I guess it seems interesting, but and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it does seem like almost typical Image and what they have going on right now. Or what they've been doing for the past several years. But I'd be willing to give it a try, especially given the fact that Layman's doing the writing.
Well, and you can never really have too many cosmic hauntings, Derek, so.
Okay, after that, I go to the first page 48, which is a number one image of a 6-issue miniseries. And actually, I thought that maybe you would highlight this one. This is Auntie Agatha's Home for Wayward Rabbits, number one. And this is written by Keith Giffen with art by Benjamin Roman. And it says, Auntie Agatha's Home for Wayward Rabbits is in danger. Run by the titular Agatha and her niece, Julie, this peculiar shelter cares for damaged and dysfunctional rabbits, and now it's being threatened by a wealthy businessman who will stop at nothing to tear it down. Of course, he's a businessman who's wealthy. This charming series, marks the return of critically acclaimed writer Keith Giffen to creator-owned work. So I think that, that's a big deal that having Giffen do this Image series. I don't know if I will get this number one issue, but it did seem interesting. So, and, Giffen is the writer, so who knows?
Yeah, the style isn't exactly what I usually gravitate towards, but I'll probably take a look at it just because of the bunnies. You know how I am. But
you're talking about the art style?
Yeah. But it'll be, I'll be interested to see what they do with it. The little excerpt wasn't super telling, but we'll see.
Yeah. And then after that, page 50, This seems interesting, and this is a work that I believe was published first in Brazil, and now we have, I guess, a translation of it here. This is called, another long title, The Terrible Elizabeth Dumb Against the Devils in Suits. And this is a one-shot. This is written by Arabson. It's just one word name, Arabson. And the translation is by James Robinson. So it says, Elizabeth Dumb, and that is D-U-M-N, is a strong, rebellious girl who's determined to make her own way. Good thing, too, because her father long ago promised her to the devil, and he's come to claim what's his. This is a story that will haunt you long after you've turned the final page. Part horror adventure, part surreal dreamscape, this original graphic novella, it's only 64 pages, features the amazing artwork of new Brazilian sensation Abramson and translation by Eisner Award winner James Robinson. So one of the things that struck me about this, I mean, I did find the solicit catching. It got my attention for sure. But this is just another example of Image doing more in terms of translated work. Mm-hmm. They just recently or are about to come out with Purdy by Kikili. So that's a translation. And then they also recently, started the series Unnatural, which I believe originally appeared in Italian and is being translated in individual issues. And so, it just strikes me that lately Image has been getting more and more into the translation game. So I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll be interested to see this one too. I'll probably pick it up. I mean, anything that says rebellious girl, if you want to talk about kind of the repetitiveness, a lot of comics right now, including a lot of them written by men, are about rebellious girls. So maybe I'm just a little numbed to that, but we'll see.
Okay. And where do you go next?
I go next to Middle West #1, which is on page 52. The writer is Scotty Young. The artist is Jorge Corona, whom I adore. I think we did a show about a year and a half ago about Jorge Corona's Feathers, which
That's
was a
right.
wonderful graphic novel our series that was collected that we really loved. And so he is back here working with Scotty Young, who probably people know from Deadpool, maybe. But
I Hate Fairyland.
Oh, yes, of course. At any rate, the description is the lands between the coasts are vast, slow to change, and full of hidden magics. And as someone who lives in the lands between the coasts, and I have also lived on both coasts, I can say that probably our hidden magics are about the same as yours. So just hang in there. But anyway, mistakes have been made. And in this new ongoing series, an unwitting adventurer searches for answers to quell a coming storm that knows his name. And I do have to say that the cover is very evocative. I don't know if it drew you in much more than the solicit. Honestly, the cover was what got my attention.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I didn't think that the solicit made or revealed much of anything. I thought it was a relatively kind of sterile, safe, if you want to put it that way, solicitation, which I find often in Image, unfortunately. I'd like a little more detail. But I'm with you. The cover definitely is eye-catching because you have a young boy standing in what I am assuming to be a Midwestern setting. But right behind him is a fox, and you're wondering, well, what is this fox doing here? And then behind him, there's a tornado, and then to the left of the tornado is something storm-like in the shape of an evil face.
Right. Like a pumpkin that's been stretched.
Exactly.
And the boy's, what I assume is the boy's heart is broken. Mm-hmm. And it's it's the same color of the heart is the same color of what looks to be. Derek, did you take that as? I'm not sure what to take it as, quite honestly.
Take what?
The image that's behind him with the pink fluid in it.
It looks like something that
that looks attached to a trailer, and yet it looks like an IV.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like an
it's
IV,
just. Yeah. It's just extremely evocative color. There's a lot going on there, and I think obviously you would need to read the comic to fully comprehend, because the only sample out on page 53 is just the young man yelling "go away" at the monster and a little bit of screaming and dialogue, but that doesn't really give us a lot of background. And so this is one that I'm definitely picking up, and not just because I live in the Midwest, but I really love Scotty Young. I love Jorge Corona. I mean, he is such an amazing artist. I can't wait. And wow, the color is just stunning too. So it's going to be a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, that's one that I'm looking forward to. Now, I next go to page 58. I know you have something later in the image section. But I want to mention on page 58, 24 panels, and this is a trade paperback. And according to the solicit, it said in June of last year, 2017, the Grenfell fire killed 72 people in the 24-story tower block of West London. I remember when that happened. It says 24 panels is an anthology comic to support the PTSD needs of the survivors. It's curated by Kieran Gillen, and it features 24 stories, each no longer than 24 panels, half drawn from professional creators who volunteer their time and half drawn from open submissions. It says that 24 panels is about community, hope, and most of all, raising as much money as possible for PTSD. So it's a good cause. I definitely would be on board for something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's some pretty big names too, like Alan Moore and Sarah Kinney. So it's for a good cause, which I think is lovely.
Right, so. Exactly. And then you go, I think, to that next page, correct?
I do, to Joseph Keatings. And Wook Jen Clark and Tamara Bonvillain. Flavor is the name of this collected series, and it says Image Comics' most delicious young adult culinary fantasy is served up in a collected edition. And I've sort of been waiting for the collected edition because if I decide to teach it, this is how I like to teach. Obviously, comics to my students, and the thing that I love about this series is the dog. And you know, so I'm sorry about the bunnies earlier, but anything that gets a dog. And anyway, it says within a strange walled city, an unlicensed chef discovers a mystery that threatens to end it all. Okay. This is a culinary epic where chefs are the ultimate celebrity and food is the most valued commodity. Featuring culinary consulting and an introduction by Ali Bouzari, renowned food scientist. And by the way, this is like maybe the third or fourth chef who is involved in comics creation. We know that the late Alan Bourdain was writing a comic series before he passed. And so I'm finding it really interesting that these chefs are it's awesome actually, are getting involved in comics so much. But this should be a lot of fun. It says perfect for readers of Bone and Lumberjanes. And so that just is about every teenager I've ever known. So I think that it says like Bone and Lumberjanes, but with way more crepes and the world's cutest dog. So, and
it's the cutest dog that won you over.
That's right. Yeah. You know it's true, Derek.
Yeah. Now, have you read any issue of Flavor?
Yes, I read the first issue, and then, you know, as all good intentions with me go, I haven't picked it up since. And you know, what I will say is that I love the style of this comic, and so I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. So we'll see. Yeah. Have you read it at all? Have you looked at it?
No, I intended to read the first issue just to see what it was like, to get a, if you will, taste for Flavor.
Yeah, I knew you were going there.
I'm sorry. But no, I never did get around to reading it. So maybe reading it in trade would be more satisfying than in single issues. I don't know.
You don't want things one course at a time. You want the whole thing right on the table and just jump in. Gotcha.
I'm a pig, yeah.
Right.
Now, a couple of other things that I want to mention, and this is kind of a twofer, and this is on the next two pages, both 60 and 61, and both of them are similar in that they're deluxe editions, which Image does every now and again with some of their series. The one on page 60 is Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey and Jordi Belair's Injection, Deluxe Edition, Volume 1. I liked Injection, but I don't know if I'll get this deluxe edition because I know I've gotten the trade, so I wouldn't want to double dip like this. But the other deluxe edition I may just get because I don't get the trades of this, and that is Rat Queens. So we've had the first volume of the deluxe edition that came out, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half ago, maybe got close to 2 years. I can't remember. But now we have the deluxe edition volume 2, which is good in that I don't know. Do you like Rat Queens?
No, I mean, I don't dislike it. I just have never read it.
Oh, it's a fun series. Fantasy is not the genre that I usually gravitate toward. But this is fun. And what Curtis Wiebe and now Owen Gianni do with the series is just really, really entertaining, really hilarious. And so I'm glad to see this deluxe edition volume 2 coming out.
Cool. Well, I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. And then the last thing I have in Image, I don't think you have anything else in Image.
No.
This is on page 63, and it is Brian Maruka and Jim Rugg, Street Angel again. And this is Street Angel versus Ninja Tech. It says, after a hard fight with Ninja Carl, the deadliest girl alive seeks revenge against the company that manufactured his dangerous weapons. Street Angel makes some friends, kinda, helps out a witch, sorta, and fights the assassins of the future, trademarked, the Ninja 6000 by Ninja Tech. Join Street Angel as she declares war on the Ninja industrial complex. Sure is convenient that it's Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. So I don't know if you've read any Street Angel comics, but they're a lot of fun. And basically you have Street Angel, who is she primarily lives on the street. She knows how to fight like a ninja, and she fights ninja, and she rides a skateboard all the time. It's just a fun comic where Maruka and Jim seem to have a great time creating various scenarios for Street Angel. Street Angel's been around for a while, but one of the things over the past year and a half that Image has been doing is putting out these oversized volumes of Street Angel. In fact, they're European album sized, in hardcover, which because the trim size is listed here is 8.5 by 12 inches. So definitely larger than your normal trade. And it's hardcover. On the one hand, I like the format. On the other, it can get kind of expensive. I mean, for instance, this comic is only 40 pages long, which is about average for a Street Angel story over the past year and a half that's been coming out from Image. And it's $19.99. So, I mean, that is a little more expensive, but you do get a nice package. Mm-hmm. Okay, since both of us are finished with Image, you want to move on to Dark Horse.
It sounds like a plan. And I start, and I think you do too, on page 103 with The Problem of Susan and Other Stories. And
yes.
This is a number of, actually 2 stories and 2 poems from Gaiman. And the illustrators are his usual compatriot, P. Craig Russell, as well as Scott Hampton and Paul Chadwick. Mm-hmm. And I think this will be really exciting. You know, our university this year is having Gaiman's American Gods as our common read.
Oh, so, you are?
Yeah, we are. And it's really exciting because we had Joe, oh gosh, there's so many Joes in children's literature that whenever I go to say one of their names, I always forget which. I mean, I know which Joe it is, but it's like, this is Joseph Michael Summers, who's a professor at Central Michigan University in the Department of English, and he's a Neil Gaiman specialist. He just had a book come out recently with the University Press of Mississippi. That's a series of interviews with Gaiman. And Joe came to our campus last month to talk about American Gods, and he definitely talked about the comic version as well. And that's the wonderful thing about Neil Gaiman and his association with so many different media, is that almost always there's going to be a comics version of his work in the pipeline, even if it doesn't come out that way to begin with. And so I think for anyone who's interested in Gaiman and who loves to see his work put into comics form, this is going to be a lot of fun to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, in fact, we never got around to it. And who knows, we still may. But at one point, you and I had even thought about doing a creator spotlight episode on Neil Gaiman, looking at, I mean, there's no way for us to discuss all of his comics, but maybe some of the more recent stuff that has been coming out, you know, comics adaptations of his prose work. And then maybe, you know, some of the older comics as well. You know, especially given the fact that, I don't know if you've been reading any of DC's or Vertigo's new Sandman universe. Have you read any of those issues?
I dipped a toe in, but I haven't had a chance. It's a real commitment, I think, to reading anything in that universe, and I just haven't had the time to make it. But have you started reading it?
Yes, and in fact, on a recent On Location show, I talked about the first 2 issues of the first 2 series, I guess, that are a part of the Sandman universe #1 and the Dreaming #1. And one of the things I pointed out on the On Location show that came out the other day is that it reads like the older Sandman, with the Sandman. Oh God, what was it that came out about 2 years ago? Not Sandman, not Odyssey or Symphony. I'm blanking on the subtitle. And I'm sure our listeners are screaming into their podcatcher, their iPod or whatever they listen on.
They have a podcatcher. I like that. It's like a dream catcher, only for podcasts.
Well, I mean, that's what the software is called that you listen to a podcast.
I know. I'm just laughing at you anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that didn't feel like the older Sandman, but the new comics coming out from, at least the ones that I've read so far, of this Sandman universe, this initiative from Vertigo is really good. I'm enjoying those first 2 issues. So that would be good as well. Cool. Maybe someday you and I can do a gaming show.
Yeah, absolutely. I could do the kids' books that have been turned into comics, and you could do the rest. It would be fun.
Yeah. Now, I next go to page 109, and again in the Dark Horse section, and this is issue #1 of a 5-issue miniseries, Lightstep. And this is written and drawn by Milos Slakovic. And it just seemed interesting. The art caught me, I think, first. And then I read the solicit. January Lee is of royal descent. It's interesting. I am too. Part of the ruling class that
No, that's Royale, remember?
That's right, Royale. Part of the ruling class that lives out their lives on accelerated light-stepped worlds where a single day in a lifetime on a normal planet. But her holy ailment, which allows her to see the truth behind the primogenitor's lies, marks her for banishment to the outer world. This is the beginning of a fantastic tale of alien worlds and star-spanning empire and rogues and rebels seeking a weapon hidden in the transmission of a radio drama from Earth thousands of years ago. And so the thing that caught me initially, again, is the art, but then I read the solicit, and what got my attention with the solicit is the way that Slakovic is apparently playing with time, which I particularly appreciate. So that may be worth checking out.
Mm-hmm. And then I think we next go to page 119, Beasts of Burden.
Mm-hmm.
Wise Dogs and Eldritch Men, number 4 of 4, Evan Dworkin, Benjamin Dewey. After being captured by the survivalist cult, the wise dogs must find a way to free themselves and prevent an ancient evil entity from being unleashed on humanity. And I must admit that I haven't gotten past the first on this, but I'm marking it for all of you who, if there is a dog in a comic you're interested. And so there it is. And I love the variant cover that they show by Jill Thompson, especially the Scottish Terrier looks particularly adorable in this. So just heads up to folks that number 4 of 4 is here. So the end is here.
That's right. And we should have a trade soon. In fact, have you read the other Beast of Burden series?
Yeah. And so, for me, I'm waiting until it comes out as a collection at this point, just because I can't seem to keep up with anything anymore. I've been buying a lot of first editions or first volumes and then just falling to the waysides and just waiting till the trade. So I'm going to wait till the trade with this one too. But
yeah, I probably will. Although I probably at the same time will read the single issues that are out, at least the first 2, maybe even 3, because Gene and I in the very near future will be interviewing Evan Dworkin. Again.
Oh, exciting. That's great.
It was 2 years ago, I think, that Gene and I interviewed Evan. And let's say that was an experience. We ended up doing, the longest interview we ever conducted. I swear to you that went on for about 2 hours and 45 minutes, to where I broke up that interview into 2 parts. because I thought it would be too long for just one episode. But Evan is entertaining. I've seen him many times at conferences. I've listened to him on panels. He is a talker, and he knows how to talk and entertain. So even though it went on for well over 2 hours when Gene and I did that interview a couple years ago, it didn't seem like that long because, again, it's Evan Dorkin, and he's a fun guy.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Now, I next go to 126. I don't think you have anything before that, right?
No.
Now, this is something I've really been looking forward to because I've heard that this creator is rather slow or slow-ish, relatively speaking, when it comes to various volumes of his manga. And this is Kenji Tsuruda's Wandering Island Volume 2. And it was about maybe a year and a half ago or so that Shay and I discussed Wandering Island Volume 1. I loved it. It's a story of this young navigator named Makura Amelia. So she flies a plane. It's only appropriate that her last name is Amelia. But and you see her on the cover of, I guess
you see most of her on the cover,
right? And she lives she lives on the coast, and so you see her often in a bikini. And I do have to say that I know that a lot of manga, rightly so, has been accused of exploiting the female body. That's one of the things that I really didn't get with Tsuruda's work, in that we do see Makura in a bikini, but she's not there for eye candy. That's basically the way she dresses because of the weather and the temperature and her being at the sea, at the shore. And she has a business carting things in this really old biplane. And what she does in Volume 1 is she finds this island that's not on any maps, but it's there again, and then it's not. And so she wonders where it is. And it is an island that, as the title suggests, wanders. And so it moves around in the ocean off the coast of Japan, southern Japan. And it's intriguing. So I've been looking forward to the second volume, and now it's about to come out. It'll be on sale in January. Okay, so I think that's all in Dark Horse, correct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, and then we get to, I guess, a really brief section in the main catalog on DC, even though we don't get the DC section proper because they have their own catalog. You don't have anything in DC, do you?
No, but you do. You have a number of things you were interested in. So
yeah, and I want to go through this really quickly. And, some of them I'm just mentioning in passing because I think it would be interesting to our listeners. Now, one title that I'm really interested in, and this is on page 5 of the DC catalog, and this is American Carnage #1, written by Brian Hill with art by Leandro Fernandez. And this is another of, I guess, what Vertigo's doing now with its new initiative. And, as I've said before, I'm pulling for Vertigo. I'm a big Vertigo fan, and over the past several years, they seem to have really kind of not gotten much traction. So I hope that with this new initiative, I know we had Border Town come out just last week, which was really interesting. And so this may be interesting as well. It says a new thrilling crime saga, and I'm on board for that, from the writer of Wildstorm, Michael Cray, and the artist of The Old Guard. Disgraced FBI agent Richard Wright, and yes, it is spelled like the African-American author, is offered a chance for redemption when his old mentor sends him undercover to infiltrate a white supremacist group believed to be responsible for the death of a fellow agent. So first and foremost, I'm on board for a crime mystery story like this. But another thing that strikes me about American Carnage #1, or American Carnage as a series, is that usually with Vertigo titles, we get a bit of the fantastic, sci-fi, fantasy, or what have you. This seems to be, in terms of genre, just straight crime story. Mm-hmm. From the description. So I'm impressed with that and definitely on board. Another thing I want to mention, and again, kind of more in passing than anything, and this is on page 12 of the DC catalog. I know we usually don't mention superheroes, but I do want to point this out. Shazam #1. And this is an extra-sized debut issue. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because DC, they own Shazam, or whom I consider real Captain Marvel. And they don't do much with him. I mean, every now and again, he shows up in, some series. So it's nice to see that he's getting his own series. I really do hope that it takes off. So I'm rooting for this.
Yeah.
Next thing I want to mention, and again, more in passing, but I think that this is important. And this is the Animal Man by Grant Morrison, Book 1, 30th Anniversary Edition. Are you a fan of Morrison's Animal Man?
I haven't read it.
Oh, God, it is wild. And this is really what put Grant Morrison on the map for many American readers, is when he took this really obscure superhero, Animal Man, and he transformed the series in ways that were really fascinating. And this is one of the earliest examples, I think, at least within a contemporary mindset, of a comic creator that is very self-reflexive and aware of himself, and the art as aware of itself as well. And in fact, toward the end of Morrison's run, Animal Man confronts who? Grant Morrison, his creator. And so Grant Morrison makes an appearance in his own comic. But there's much more that's metafictional and self-reflective than that. So it's nice to see that we have the first book in the 30th anniversary edition of Animal Man. So if you're not familiar with Animal Man, this may be a good way to familiarize yourself with this and jump on board. Mm-hmm. After that, I want to mention a couple of new editions. On page 73, we have a new edition of Brian Michael Bendis's Goldfish. And, as we all know, as listeners, I'm assuming know that Brian Michael Bendis moved to DC a few months ago. And one of the things that they've been doing, in addition to putting him on other titles like Superman and what have you, or Action, that many of his older properties that are part of the Jinx world, as it's called, are being reprinted or maybe even released in new stories. And so this is an example, Goldfish, of something that's being reprinted, and that's solicited on 73. And on 77 is another new edition, and this is Jinx, Brian Michael Bendis' Jinx. So I'm not going to get these because I have the originals, but if you're not familiar with Brian Michael Bendis' earlier work that dealt with crime, then definitely check these out, these new editions. And then the last thing I want to mention, it's on page 78 in the DC catalog, is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Jubilee edition. So, of course, this is written by Alan Moore with art by Kevin O'Neill. And what this does is it combines the first two volumes of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with volume 3, which is the Black Dossier, which had been kind of a separate publication from the original two Extraordinary Gentlemen volumes. But now this is combined together in one Jubilee edition. So there you go.
608 pages of comics goodness. That is a lot of that's heft.
That's right. But it's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and it's absolutely fabulous. I love what Moore and O'Neill have been doing over the past number of years with not only the League, but with Century and with, let's say, the newer stuff that they're doing that we have, Tempest. So.
And a lot of intertextuality for children's lit authors with this series, including Flora and Ulysses, which won the Newbery. There's some things that go on, and I don't want to spoil the book for you, but there are things that go on in that text. It's by Kate D. Camilla with, I think it's Scott Campbell doing the art, are referencing League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So if you're a children's lit person, you might want to pick these up if you haven't already and read them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, Gwen, we're finished with DC. Let's move on to the IDW section. And I believe that you and I are highlighting some of the same things in starting off with IDW.
Mm-hmm. The first one is Atomic Robo and the Dawn of a New Era, #1. Writer Brian Clevenger, artist Scott Wigden. I can never say his last name.
Wegner.
Wegner. And I love this cover, Derek. It's beautiful. Like, it's the kind of thing I would like to have in my hallway as a poster. It's beautiful. It's so cool. It's pink background, blue foreground, the anatomy of a robot on the inside with little stairs and details, and I just love it. So anyway, sorry, I get really excited by stuff.
No, and I think you have every reason to be excited by Atomic Robo. I mean, I absolutely love this title, and it's good to see that we have a new series now, Atomic Robo and the Dawn of a New Era, #1. And by the way, this is on page 149. So it's always good news when we get a new Atomic Robo storyline. But on the page before that, 148, I wanted to highlight something for listeners who may not have experienced the joy of Atomic Robo. First and foremost, you do not know what you're missing. But also now you have an opportunity to jump on board in a rather condensed way. And this is, again, on page 148, Atomic Robo Greatest Hits. And I guess this is a reprinting of some of the previous stories. It says scientist, adventurer, enemy to insane dinosaurs, evil AIs, and rock monsters alike. Atomic Robo does it all. Learn all about Tesladyne's famous action scientists in 2 great stories, Centralia and The Trial of Atomic Robo. Fun for the whole family, as long as your family likes action, adventure, science. And did we mention insane dinosaurs? And the thing that strikes me about this is not only do we have, let's say, Atomic Robo's greatest hits, so it's a great way of not necessarily catching up, but let's say introducing yourself if you're not already to Atomic Robo. But this issue is only 32 pages long, and it's $1. So you can't beat that. And I'm wondering, though, and we have no indication of this, if this is going to be something that we'll see again. So, for instance, Atomic Robo Greatest Hits #2, because these are regular length comic books for a really cheap price. Or if this is just a one-off, right?
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe part of it is just to entice people to read the new, the new number. But $1 for 32 pages of comics goodness, please, people.
That's right.
Run, don't walk.
What a bargain. Okay. So where do you go next, my friend?
Well, I actually go next to page 163. And, because we're, believe it or not, nearing the holiday season in the United States.
Yeah.
It's just some of the comics you may have noticed throughout everything, including in DC, have been focusing on Christmas. And 163 brings us a comic that I find to be kind of fascinating. It's called Jingle Bell, the Homemaid's Tale. The writer is Paul Dini. The artist is Nicoletta Baldari. And it says, we all know that Santa arrives on Christmas Eve bearing bright, shiny new toys for happy kids everywhere. You could have written that copy, Derek, dang it. But what happens to the humble homespun holiday gifts often passed over in the rush? The grandmother-made sock animals or the paste and cardboard unicorns given from little sisters to older brothers. Quite often, they wind up shoved aside, ignored, or tossed in the trash with the wrapping paper until the night after Christmas when they are rescued and magically brought to life by the mysterious queen of toys. And so basically, this is a queen who is amassing an army of abandoned toys that she calls the Homemaids for the sole purpose of vanquishing the Kringle family and seizing the holiday season for herself. This just looks hysterical. And the cover is really funny. It's amazing. I really want to read this very badly. I want to read it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you read any other Jingle Bell books?
No, I haven't. And I obviously am remiss for this. This looks wonderful. Yeah.
I don't know if they do it every Christmas, but I know many Christmases there'll be kind of a one-shot Jingle Bell issue coming out. I couldn't remember what the publisher is. I guess it was IDW, but
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, special for the season. Maybe that's something that you guys can look at for a December Young Reader show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I next go to 65. I don't think you have anything before that.
Yeah, 165.
165, yeah. And 165, Night Moves. This is written by VJ Boyd and Justin Boyd with art by Clay McCormack. And, I mentioned earlier that, one of my favorite genres is crime. And this is crime noir, but with a horror twist. It says noir meets horror as small-time Vegas hustler Chris Dundee finds himself tangled in a web of danger and the occult. He's been on the wrong end of a pair of brass knuckles plenty of times, but this time he might be dealing with the devil himself.
Oh.
So this looks interesting. I don't see that there's any indication as for how long this series is going to run. I would guess it would be a limited series, but who knows?
Cool.
And then the last thing I have in IDW is on page 167. And this is in the Black Crown section. It's that imprint that Shelley Bond is editing. And this is the Black Crown Omnibus Volume 1. Now, we've seen many titles coming out from Black Crown, and then we have the Black Crown Quarterly. But here, apparently, we have a compendium of comics from the Quarterly Black Crown. It says collected in one seriously thick paperback. And it is, 256? So I guess it's seriously thick enough. So it includes, I guess, a lot of stuff from the Black Crown Quarterly. And if you haven't been keeping up with this, then you have an opportunity now to get that stuff in omnibus format.
Yeah, and we really liked Assassinistas. I think the first issue of that is in this. So if you haven't read that, it's cool.
Yeah. And I think that's all in IDW, correct?
Yeah.
And next we go to Dynamite, and both of us, interestingly enough,
Quelle surprise.
Yes, start at the same place in Dynamite.
Yes, we do, with James Bond 007 #1's ongoing series. And Derek and I just did a show on a number of Diamond's James Bond titles.
Dynamite.
And so, I'm sorry, I'm so tired. Dynamite. This is what happens when we record at the end of a school week. I just absolutely love this series now. I've become a complete groupie, so I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, and this is striking for a couple of reasons. One, we have a very different kind of writer. Greg Pak is the writer here. Mark Lamming is the artist. And one of the joys of doing that James Bond Dynamite special that we did a couple of weeks ago, Gwen, was seeing how different writers and artists handled James Bond. And even though there was some consistency among some of the writers, not all. And, so finding some of the differences as well as some of the similarities, I think, was part of the joy of doing that special. And so now we get another creative team, Pak and Lamming, and I'm curious to see what they do with it. Another reason why I find this interesting is that this is going to be an ongoing series. So, with the initial 2 volumes of James Bond, or I guess the first volume, which came out in 2 different trades by Ellis, those were limited. And then the other series, the James Bond series, were limited to about 6 issues per. Now we have something that's ongoing. So I'm wondering how, if at all, their approach to James Bond, Dynamite's approach to James Bond, will change.
Mm-hmm. And really, if you look over on 182, the atmospherics for Lamming's art, I mean, they're really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'll be, by the way, I just have to ask you something on that page. Is it just me? But in the bottom panel on the left, does the guy with the suitcase look like George W. Bush?
With blonde hair, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, it looks like a young W. I was looking through it. It really made me stop and go, okay, is that intentional? Is it a coincidence? But I mean, it literally looks like him. So,
and also there's a word balloon coming from his mouth that says strategery. So
no,
right. There's not.
Did a bump. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I didn't notice that originally, but now I'm going to think of George W. whenever I read this.
Well, so, you're welcome, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. And we should also mention that on page 183, this is following those selections of art, including the George W. lookalike. On 183, there is a very short interview with Greg Pak talking about how he plans on dealing with James Bond. Now, I know you have that's all I have in Dynamite. You have one other thing that you would like to choose. And I have to say, I'm surprised that you chose this. So
I knew you were going to be surprised.
Please proceed. I mean, I'm pleased for a number of reasons, but that's another story. But go ahead.
Okay. So actually, Derek, you're going to be really disappointed in why I'm interested in it. It's Betty Page, #1. Writer's David Avallone. Is that how you say his name? Or Avallone?
Avallone, yeah.
Avallone, okay. And artist is Julius Ota.
Mm-hmm.
And it says the brand new Queen of England has mysteriously vanished, and British intelligence needs a helping hand from the world's greatest model spy. Can Betty the First find Queen Elizabeth II before the news gets out and panics all of Great Britain? So yes, Derek, usually you know how I feel about cheesecake, but I just have to say that the variant cover by Scott, I think it's Chantier, is a picture of Betty riding on a moped with a British flag on it with Queen of England in the passenger seat with her legs askew, and it's just hysterical. So I know I have surprised you, but when it comes to the royal family, I will make an exception and buy this variant cover. So there you go. That's it. We can move on now.
Yeah. No, I agree with you that of all the covers, and one of the things about Dynamite that kind of bugs me is that they, with many of their titles, come out with a gazillion different
I know.
variants. That's not why I'm in comics. I know that's why some people are, and that's fine. More power to you. But I don't like variant covers. But I'm with you that the one that strikes my fancy the most is the one by Chandler, and the one that you described with the Queen of England, and she's riding a moped with the British flag on the front. So yeah, that is eye-catching. Now, a guilty pleasure is in terms of the cheesecake factor and Betty Page. That's very eye-catching. But, since I was really young, I've had a thing for Betty Page. Surprise, surprise. But I have to say, I've never read a Dynamite Betty Page title before. So.
Well, this can be the first one then. So there we go.
Yeah, I don't know, but but it is interesting though, that cover. I agree. So yeah, that's all that I think both of us have in Dynamite. And next we go to Boom Studios. And I think we start. What was that?
I said boom.
Okay.
Sorry.
I thought that was your little boom song. And so we go to, I think, the same solicit, don't we, on 210?
Yes, we do. Smooth Criminals, #1 of 12. And what actually got my attention wasn't so much the cover, which is interesting, but the author team, because Kirsten Kiwi Smith and Kurt Lustgarten are also part of the team for Misfit City, which I've been reading for the last year. I'm really interested to see what they will do with this. And this one is illustrated by Leisha Riddell. And it says there are certain things Brenda expects to find while hacking: money, secrets, occasional pictures of cats. She is not expecting to find a cryogenically frozen master thief from the 1960s. Mia is everything Brenda is not: cool, confident, beautiful, and utterly unprepared for the digital age. So the premise itself sounds extremely interesting to me, and I'm really going to be interested to see how this is brought together. Mm-hmm. It's the generational thing. I'm currently working on a book on 1960s and 1970s teen culture. And when I say working on a book, I mean guiltily reading stuff when I should be doing other things. But this series kind of brings those things together. So I'll be interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah. And we have on the next page, 211, some sample art from the interior, which looks really good. And in fact, this is, I guess, something else that I think would be great for the Young Readers show. Yeah. And, I've loved in the past what you and Paul, and then on the last episode you and I did, in the kind of books that we've discussed and you've discussed on the Young Readers show. I think it'd be fun to look at single issues of series every now and again. Right. I know you've done that in the past. I think you did that with Backstagers, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think looking at something like this, or what was it that we saw earlier, that single issue that I mentioned?
Help me, Derek.
Yeah. I just mentioned it a little while ago.
No. Our listeners are again screaming at us, and that's okay.
Maybe Light Step?
That was it, Light Step.
Yeah, that maybe you could handle that.
Yeah.
And I think we both go to the next solicit on page 212, right?
Right, with something that's going to have a lot of my friends really excited about. So
they're big Firefly fans.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yep. And this is Firefly #1 written by the aforementioned Greg Pak. And this one is illustrated by Dan McDade. And, you know, I'm a fan of the Firefly series. Firefly, because the film was called Serenity. I liked it. I have to say, I haven't read the comic, let's say, when it was over at Dark Horse. But the reason I highlighted it, maybe different from the reasons why you wanted to point this out, is that this is a property that Dark Horse had, but now Boom has. And one of the things I've noticed lately is, I guess we could call it a drain at Dark Horse. They've lost, they lost Star Wars a few years ago to Marvel. Now they've lost, which is a big cash cow, I think, for them, relatively speaking. Now they've lost Firefly. And I think they've also lost recently Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So those were a lot of the comics that Dark Horse, I know, did a lot with those franchises. So I'm wondering what this will mean for the future of Dark Horse.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know.
Well, my friends will be excited to delve into this from Boom.
Mm. I think you may be done with Boom.
I
Studios,
am.
right?
You are not, though.
No,
So.
I have one more thing to mention in Boom, and that is on page 216. And this is The Empty Man #1, written by Colin Bunn, illustrated by Jesus Hervas. Now, it's interesting that this is titled The Empty Man, this series. And I don't know if this is going to be ongoing or limited, because there was about a year and a half ago an earlier series that Cullen Bunn and I think Vanessa Del Rey illustrated called The Empty Man. And I read that. I thought it was pretty good. You know, with Cullen Bunn, you can always expect some nice horror. And so that's what we have. I'm just finding it curious that it's not subtitled anything like, you know, The Empty Man 2, Electric Boogaloo, or anything like that, right? It's the same title as the original series, which I think can be confusing to readers.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, go figure.
Well, yeah, you know, this is not my cup of tea, so.
Yeah. So you're not a Cullen Bunn fan?
Well, I'm not a horror fan.
Yeah. Well, that's primarily what he does.
Yes, I know. That's what I mean. So, yeah. No, I'm not.
Okay, so now we go to what some people call the back half of the catalog, some people call the green section. Basically, this is all the publishers that are listed in previews that aren't premier publishers, right? The ones we've just been talking about, plus Marvel. And so now, where do you begin in
I begin on
section?
Page 224.
Okay.
With a
224?
224. 224.
Okay.
Not 223. If you go to 225, you've gone too far. Okay. With Iron or the War After. And this is a softcover graphic novel. It's written and illustrated by S.M. Vidari.
This is in the Boom section.
Yeah. No, it's not. Oh, my God. It's still in Boom. I'm so sorry. I guess I thought it was in the back section. Oh, well, never mind.
Okay,
It's next to the back section.
Okay.
How about that?
So apparently we're not finished with Boom.
Well, we will be when I tell everyone why they need to read this.
Okay.
How about that?
Tell us.
I will tell you, because as NPR has pointed out, it evokes both Mouse and Animal Farm, and anything that does that already I'm interested in. And the solicit says it is the aftermath of a long war in a world of constant winter, when an intelligent spy from the resistance, the rabbit Hardin, steals secret information from a military base of the regime. His actions set off a chain of events that reverberates through the ranks of both sides, touching everyone from the highest-ranking officials to the smallest orphan child. This is the debut graphic novel from this author who weaves a heartfelt fable shrouded in political intrigue. And it's the cover is amazing. There's a background of this sort of barren tree with snowflakes around it, and then there's a floating panel with a bunny. This is Hardin running against a sort of stark background, and I absolutely have to have this book. So. There you go.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Okay, so now we go to the green section, which includes all the publishers that aren't premier publishers. And I have, I guess, 2 or 3 things before you go to your first solicit.
Cool.
And the first thing I want to mention, this is in the Aftershock section, and this is something that's a little different from them. It's an original graphic novel called Witchhammer, and this is written by Cullen Bunn, again, with art by Dalibor Talajic. And it says, Witch, the word conjures images of hags in black robes and crooked hats standing over cauldrons of bubbling brew. But witches are among us, and we do not realize it. They are our friends and neighbors. They are our family members. They are our idols. And someone is murdering them. So, it seems, I guess, an interesting premise. There seems to be some crime element to this, according to the cover, because we have a couple of people with guns there. I don't know if they're detectives or police officers. Who knows? But it definitely is horror, for no other reason Cullen Bunn is writing it. But I mention this because Aftershock, they do a lot of series, and so it's not unusual to see, let's say, a new number 1 for another series that they're doing. But it's not often. I don't remember ever seeing it. Maybe they have it, and it just not coming to mind. An original graphic novel. I know they've done books before, but this being an OGN is kind of a standout. So, Aftershock, they do a lot. And in fact, as I've told Paul on past preview shows, they do so much that it's gotten to where I have trouble keeping up with them. So I don't, which is unfortunate because I kind of like what Aftershock does. This one, though, I may check out.
Cool.
Now, a couple of other things I wanted to mention before we get to where you are going in the Archie section. They're on page 264, and the first one is published by Ahoy Comics, which is a new press that Grant Morrison is behind. And this is the second issue of Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror. And and this is written by Tom Payer and others, with art by Fred Harper and others. And the reason I mention this is because I think it was Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror was number 1 was solicited last time. And when we did the August preview show, I don't think I was aware that this was going to be an ongoing series. So when I saw number 2, it's like, oh, okay. And the thing that's so striking about this solicit is we see Edgar Allan Poe with a snifter of, I'm assuming, brandy, and he's in his tighty-whities standing above a highway.
I know. It is really amazing.
Yeah. And, at first I thought that this Edgar Allan Poe Snifter of Horror or Terror was going to be something specifically for the Halloween season, but now I'm not so sure if it's an ongoing series. I'm fascinated by comics and adaptation, and especially how certain authors like Edgar Allan Poe or Nathaniel Hawthorne or Mark Twain or Herman Melville have been adapted, broadly speaking, in one form or another, either their texts, their poetry or their fiction, or them as figures. And there's a long history with all of these creators, all of these writers like Poe and Melville, being represented in strange and different ways in comics. This seems strange, and I'm looking forward to seeing the first issue of Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror, and now we have number 2 solicited. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is yet another title that maybe you should consider, maybe for a young reader show. And this is under Albatross Funny Books, and it is Grumble, number 1, written by Raffer Roberts, with art by Mike Norton and Marissa Louise. And it seems cute, and it deals with a dog. So I know you'll like it. It says, when the forces of good and evil are hunting you down, the only logical thing to do is disguise yourself as a dog and go on the run. Eddie is a low-rent hustler who got magically turned into a pug during a con gone wrong. Okay, I wonder what kind of con that was. Tala is Eddie's long-lost part-demon daughter. When Tala finds herself the target of powerful interdimensional forces, she goes to Eddie for help, setting off a chain reaction of chaos and destruction that could threaten the very fabric of existence. So that seems an interesting premise. It's a detailed solicit. I didn't even read all of it. And see, this is the kind of solicit that really gets my attention. We were talking about the kind of sparseness that we saw in Image. But what we have here with Grumble, I think, is a good example that people should use. So there you go.
That was one tough pug. So
yeah. So next you go to what, 275?
Yeah, Archie number 700.
Dun, da, da, da.
I know. Script Nick Spencer, art and cover Marguerite Sauvage. A brand new era of Archie begins in this landmark 700th issue of our flagship series. Join the. You were just waiting for that word, too.
I was waiting for a pause. Yeah. So, hey, issue 700 of Archie, something to announce.
Something to announce. And so, actually, the drawing looks pretty interesting. The variant covers look interesting. We'll have to see. But since I'm sort of committed to writing on Archie from time to time, I figure I better give it a look. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd mention that. And you're right, 700. That's a lot.
And you know, everything's Archie.
Oh, wow. I feel old now.
Archie's here. Doom, 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 doom. Okay. I'll spare our listeners my awful singing and trip down memory lane.
Do you remember getting 45s off the back of cereal boxes? Because if you remember that, then I mean, so, that's what I mean when I say I feel old now. Anyway, go ahead.
That's a big deal, big milestone. And every now and again, I like to read Archie. And I think that over the past several years, they've been doing some really interesting things with, let's say, Archie and horror, like Afterlife with Archie. Also, the new Mark Waid. Well, not new anymore, but when Mark Waid started to do it, with Fiona Staples, the new Archie. It became really interesting. We have, I think last month, solicited Archie 1941, I think it is. Mm-hmm. So, they're doing some really different things with Archie, and I like that.
Yeah, me too.
And I think both of us next go to page 286, correct?
Correct.
With Avery Hill Publishing.
Our friends at Avery Hill.
That's right. And really our friends. In fact, one of our, someone who works at Avery Hill, who we contact all the time in terms of new releases, Katrina Chapman, has her own book coming out, Follow Me In. And actually this is something that, Katrina that had told me about last year at some point, because we looked at some of her cat comics, her mini comics that she does. And she had informed me that she had a graphic novel coming out. So this should come out toward the end of the year. I think she told me November or December. But we're really looking forward to this. It says Kat had no responsibilities and nothing to tie her down, but she had graduated university with no plans. She was an artist who hadn't drawn in 5 years. She was lost. What's more, she's been avoiding admitting to herself something that all of those around her knew, that her boyfriend, Richard, had some serious problems with alcohol. Looking for a fresh start, the two of them quit their jobs and embarked on a journey to Mexico for what they expected to be an adventure of a lifetime. It led to experiences that changed both of their lives and to Kat rediscovering the love of art, a lifelong attachment to Mexico, and the strength to move on. Follow Me In is in part memoir, part coming-of-age story, part love letter to Mexico, and is undoubtedly a major work from one of the best illustrators and comics makers in the UK. And I do have to say that Kat Chapman is an incredible artist, and she knows how to tell a story. I've been reading, her Kat comics, mini comics, and I cannot wait to read this new graphic novel. And in fact, I've already been talking with Kat about having her on the show for an interview when this comes out.
Oh, how great. That would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. But there's another title listed under Avery Hill that I think you're excited about as well.
Yeah, it's Retrograde Orbit. It's a graphic novel by Christina Bekzinski, and the cover is awesome. First of all, the cover shows this sort of space person that looks like a cat, and it says, but listen to the solicit, because I just loved it. First of all, the main character is called Flint. I'm from Flint, and this character's kind of kick-ass, so I like to think that it was intentional. But at any rate, at the outer edge of the solar system, on the mining planet Tiza, Flint and her mother live in the colony of Swift Springs. Displaced by a nuclear event, Flint's family settled in the Swift Springs 2 generations ago to become miners. Soon, Flint will be old enough to begin her apprenticeship at the refinery. But is the home that her family has built for her enough, or will a mysterious irradiated planet pull her away from them? By following in their footsteps and leaving to forge a new path, is she betraying her family or honoring their legacy? And this is sort of exploring notions of home, the desire to leave it. It just sounds really interesting. And the illustrations are really compelling, sort of iconic and interesting. And so I definitely want to pick that up.
Yeah. And, you can't really go wrong with Avery Hill. They've been putting out over the past few years a lot of interesting texts.
Absolutely.
I want to stay on that page and point out a title from a publisher I don't think I've ever mentioned or even seen in previews before, and this is A Wave Blue World, Inc., and this is a new title by A. David Lewis and with art by Noel Tuazan and Rob Kunenburrows. Kismet, Man of Fate. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, Gwen, but Kismet, Man of Fate is actually an older superhero. In fact, I think it may be the very first Muslim superhero. But I have not seen anything of Kismet actually since Craig Yo had, I think, Kismet as one of his super weird heroes. I think that's where I saw Kismet last. But now we have A. David Lewis and Tuazan and Cronenborough bringing back Kismet. So, hey, I'm interested to see what transpires here.
Cool.
I've got something on page 290. Do you have anything before that? I can't recall.
I do.
Okay.
This is Black Mask Studios, and I'm interested in the trade paperback of We Are the Danger, written and illustrated by Fabian Lelay. And it says, starting as the new girl in your senior year of high school is never easy, and Julie Malayari is having a terrible first day until she meets Tabitha. After a night out at a rock show, their friendship quickly grows, and before they know it, the two form a band with their sights on a record deal. They just need to win it in a nationwide battle of the bands, et cetera, et cetera. And, okay, so just like you were saying, about me, that if there's a dog on the cover, but if there's a woman with a guitar on the cover, I'm also going to have to buy that comic. And I mean, it's really funny because we had talked last week about Hope Larson's All Summer Long, which is a comic with a girl with a guitar on the cover. So, these are comics that I find interesting, and I'm really looking forward to this one. And the color is beautiful. The colorist is Claudia Aguirre, and so I'm really looking forward to reading that comic.
Mm-hmm. Now, on page 290, under Birdcage Bottom Books, and Birdcage Bottom does a lot of really interesting things. There's a book that seems interesting, The Complete Matinee Junkie, 5 Years at the Movies. This is written and drawn by Jordan Jeffries. And what this does is it collects the entire run of Jeffries' ongoing comic series. A full year of new material is also included. It's part autobiography, part cultural review. It includes entries on every movie that Jeffries saw in theaters each year, with a complete collection spanning almost 250 movies over 5 years from 2013 to 2017. So, you get his take on films, some of his rants, some of his curious observations. So if you're a movie fan especially, this may be something you want to check out.
Yeah, it looks interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure that you have a lot of stuff in Boundless that you want to point out.
Yeah, let's just keep going, dude. Keep walking.
Yeah,
Walk on by.
Yeah, Boundless, I have to say, is we never say anything about Boundless, but, I'll say it now. It's embarrassing. It's really sad, and it makes me at times sorry that I'm a man. So let me apologize.
That's okay. That's a healthy feeling to
gender.
have every once in a while, Derek.
Okay.
I'm just teasing you. All right, so let's go on to some comics that we really liked.
Yeah, and I'm on page 302.
Right.
And you are as well?
No, actually,
Oh, okay.
you are.
Okay,
You are.
yes.
You are the sole purveyor of page 302. So let us know.
Well, this is from one of my favorite publishers, Conundrum Press. They're out of Canada. We've done quite a number of shows where we have either, let's say, focused as a publisher spotlight on Conundrum, looked at a Conundrum book, or even interviewed Conundrum creators. And this one is called The Vagabond Valise. And it's by who's called a classic, underground creator, Cirrus. It says the first graphic novel from a founding father of the Quebec comics underground, poignant account of an alcoholic father who drags his family into misfortune. The Vagabond Valise is a heartbreaking autobiography story of Cirrus, represented by his chicken-headed alter ego. Cirrus paints a sincere and poetic portrait of a troubled childhood spent in and out of foster homes and the working class post-war Quebec where it took place. And it's also the winner of the Quebec Graphic Novel of the Year. So, I am unfamiliar with Cirrus. Although it strikes me, apparently he represents himself as this small chicken, which reminds me of what we see with Louis Trondheim, right? Who represents himself as, a bird animal creature. So, yeah, this is interesting. I want to find out more about Cirrus now, and the fact that this is coming out from Conundrum just cements it for me.
Cool.
You don't have anything until Fantagraphics, is that correct?
Yeah, you're actually, I think, next on 313.
Yes. Yeah. If I look at my list ahead of time, I could probably make this much more streamlined. And yeah, this is something that I'm interested in, I guess, because of the publisher, Edition Tabanese, and I think that's a publisher out of France. And this is Paul Kirschner's Hieronymus and Bosch. So apparently this was a comic that, at least if you're French and you were into comics, that you would recognize. It says, Meet the medieval miscreant Hieronymus and his wooden duck Bosch. Since their tragic comic death, they are both living in a cartoonish hell that where lakes are made of lava, or more often poop. And an army of mischievous, spiky-tailed devils go around playing pranks on their inmates. Despite many gag-filled attempts at escaping this literal hell, Hieronymus and Bosch always end up being the butt of their guards' most humiliating and painful jokes. And so, yeah, this seems interesting. I don't know if I'd get it. Actually, it may be something that Pascal and I could talk about on a future Eurocomics episode.
Absolutely. And it does look sort of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think next, on the next page, we go to Fantagraphics.
Yes, and you can always expect incredible things from Fantagraphics. And the Fantagraphics section is, as it usually is, 2 pages long. This time, pages 314 and 315. Most of what I'm interested in is on page 314, though.
Well, I will say that this wouldn't be a Derek and Gwen preview show without a mention of the Beatles. And actually, the Beatles get mentioned twice in the show. This is the first of those two. And if you're paying attention at home, it could be the world's tiniest drinking game. But I'm interested in M. Dean's comic called I Am Young. And it says, I Am Young is a series of short stories tied together by one central story about 2 teenagers who meet and fall in love after a Beatles concert. There we go. Da, 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 in 1964. Throughout the 60s, they grow up and keep their relationship going. And like the Beatles, by 1970, Miriam and George's relationship is on the rocks. So this hits on almost everything I'm working on right now. The 1960s, the 1970s, young people, concerts, and the Beatles. So I just can't wait to get this. The cover, it's kind of hard to tell what's going to go on the inside because the cover looks like a late 1960s, early 1970s notebook cover.
It does, yeah.
And so it's very stylized, almost clip art like, with some psychedelic flowers against a rainbow background. There's not a lot you can tell from that, but I really don't care. I'm ordering this book. So there we go.
Yeah, and this is interesting, especially coming so soon after Carol Tyler's Fab Four Mania. So now we have Fantagraphics doing another Beatle-themed text. So, yeah, I'm definitely on board for this one, and, we're big Beatles fans. But, the title right next to it, Parallel Lives by Olivier Swarvin, I guess I used to pronounce his last name. I love Swarvin's work. We've discussed it at times on the Comics Alternative. He's just an incredible creator, and it's really nice to see that he has a new book coming out, Parallel Lives. It says, from one of the world's most celebrated cartoonists comes this unique collection of 6 wildly inventive short stories, each a surrealist tour de force that might collectively be dubbed speculative memoir. In spite of all the rational perception and in spite of the author's predilection for cartoon surrealism, Parallel Lives glows and hums and pulsates interesting. Like a portal to another reality, and is the latest masterpiece and one of comics' most distinctive bodies of work. So, yeah, I think that's the thing in Fantagraphics I'm most excited about, and I hate to say that because I'm a gigantic Beatles fan, but I love Schwarvin's comics. Underneath that is yet another in their EC series, this one by Ingalls and Feldstein, Doctor of Horror, and Other Stories. But right beside that is something that I'm even more interested in. Bill Shelley's James Warren, Empire of Monsters, the man behind Creepy, Vampirella, and Famous Monsters. Now, I spoke with Bill on the show about 2 months ago. He had, if you recall, that book, a memoir, kind of expanded memoir.
Right. That was the show I was supposed to do and couldn't.
Yeah, you couldn't, unfortunately, and we missed you. But yeah, that was about his time in comics fandom. And he had told me, I think it was during that interview, maybe toward the tail end, that he was working on a book about James Warren. So now we have this solicited, so it's about to come out.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. What else on this page of Fantagraphics fascinates you?
That was it for me. I moved on to First Second, but if there's other things you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention, we had a few months ago the first volume in their Spain Rodriguez reprints. Now we get the second volume, and this one is called Warrior Women. Classic underground creator. And speaking of underground, right next to that is another title from Fantagraphics Underground, which Gary Groth has called the FU imprint. He called it that when I was interviewing him early in the year. This is by Jim Blanchard and Chris Cagle, Meat Wrap. Attention all mutants, your prayers have been answered. Come hither and witness the unholy union of professional sickos Chris Siegel and Jim Blanchard. Sit back and digest the obsessively detailed, psychedelically twisted, and elegantly repulsive comics that comprise the corpus known as Meat Warp. It's, warp, not rap, I'm sorry. So that's even weirder, Meat Warp.
Yeah, that is weird.
But now First Second. And this is on page, 316?
Yes, and there's 2 books that I'm really interested in here. One is Deo Gratias. Thanks be to God is the translation of that. A Tale of Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And this is by J.P. Stassen. And the cover is just so unbelievably poignant and moving. It's a child sort of crouched on the ground against a somewhat apocalyptic background. And the reading is a moving and thought-provoking nonfiction graphic novel set in Rwanda before and after the genocide of the Tutsis, now with a new introduction by Beata Umbaye Marese. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. It's the harrowing tale of the Tutsi genocide as it unfolds, seen through the eyes of a young boy. And so I definitely want to get this book and to read it and perhaps to teach it. So that was the first book that from First Second, which really they're expanding to do some very fascinating things with and First Second.
And we should mention that this is a reissue edition. I can't remember when, but I do remember when this originally came out.
Okay, then I feel badly about not being a close reader here, but it will be for the first time for me, and I'm really interested in it.
Well, it's got the new intro, so I think I may have the original packed away somewhere, but it's one that I got, I think, from for a second, but I never got around to reading. And now we have this reissue. So
well, I'm excited about that. And then the other one that I'm interested in is Tiger versus Nightmare Volume 1. And the cover is really charming. It's a little tiger with its fist balled up on top of the bed, right? It says, Tiger is a very lucky kid. She has a monster living under her bed. Every night, Tiger and Monster play games until it's time for lights out. Of course, Monster would never try to scare Tiger. That's not what best friends do. But Monster needs to scare someone. It's a monster after all. So while Tiger sleeps, Monster scares all of her nightmares away. So it sounds like it's obviously for younger readers, really sweet text. And the author is Emily Tetry, and I'll look forward to this. It looks sweet.
Yeah, it does. And I assume that either of those that you mentioned in First Second, or even both, are things that you're thinking about for future young reader shows.
And for teaching too. So I'm always excited to find, especially the longer texts are the ones that I like to teach. So it's always exciting when those come up.
Mm-hmm. Now I next go to page 318, and this is under Gallery 13. And for those who may not know, even though we've mentioned this a number of times, the Comics Alternative, Gallery 13 is the graphic novel imprint of Simon & Schuster. They do some really interesting things, and some of the things that they do are reprints of things that have already been published. And we saw this, several months ago when they came out with Creepshow, based on Stephen King's work, and the movie. And so now we get something else from the world of Stephen King that's a reprint. I find this fascinating. They're publishing or republishing or putting out new editions of the various volumes in Stephen King's Gunslinger series. So we have the Dark Tower. We have Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger Born, then the Volume 2, The Long Road Home, 3, Treachery, 4, The Fall of Gilead, and 5, The Battle of Jericho Hill. What's interesting here is that these comics were originally published by Marvel. Mm-hmm. And so now Gallery 13 apparently has the rights to republish them. So I'm curious about the behind the scenes stuff that went on. I'm sure I'll never know that, but I think it's good that they're doing this. I mean, I like when Gallery 13 does original material, but this reprint, I'd be willing to devote an entire episode to the Dark Tower series.
And you will be doing that with someone else, as we know.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you not a Stephen King fan?
I'm not a horror fan. I'm not at all interested in it. I find it terrifying, and I'm already terrified enough by the 21st century. I do not need any metaphorical help in that way. So I will go back to having Tiger and Monster take care of my nightmares, and I'll be happy.
Well, one thing that both of us are excited about, I think, and we want to point out, is on page 322.
Yes, it's from Griffin Books. It's Tom Hart's The Art of the Graphic Memoir. And since both of us are very interested in graphic memoir, I'm super excited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that this is written by Tom Hart, I think, kind of cements things for me. And he's done his own kind of graphic memoir. Just recently, Rosalie Lightning, which was
absolutely, that was really good moving book.
Yes. Yeah. And so, he is now have written a book on how to do graphic memoir. Although I'm glad to see this. I'm glad that Tom Hart is doing it. On the other hand, I do have to admit that it seems that about every other alternative or indie comic we come across is a memoir in one form or another. And I mean, that's just a genre that, at least in the United States, I don't think so much overseas, but at least in the U.S., is, I don't want to say oversaturated or overrepresented, but there's a lot of material out there. And in fact, at one point, I remember talking with Gilbert Hernandez, and he jokingly said that, you turn around and there's another graphic autobiography. He said, everybody's doing it. Can't people just do something different?
Well, do you want to hear my theory on this, Derek?
Sure.
Because I do have a theory. With the rise of comics being taught in art schools, this is the perfect thesis, right? You're writing from your own life, so the amount of research that you have to do is not as much as it might be. You can focus on the art. So if you're a graduate student or a BA student who has to do a thesis, very often students choose to do memoir, and if they're really good, they get picked up. That is my theory. I will now step aside and see what you think. But
no, I mean, that makes sense.
I think that there's a lot of our comics creators who are coming up through formal study. And this is something that I think I say that also as someone who's in a program that has a very strong MFA in fiction component. And a lot of our students in the past have chosen this as a path as well. So just saying that I think that some of it has to do with on the one hand, it's wonderful that there's a place now beyond just a trade school where people, and I don't mean that negatively, but I mean, there's an academic place where our comics creators are able to study and to work with each other in a good community of inquiry. But I think that maybe that explains why a lot of first comics, especially for creators, are autobiographical. So,
oh yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me. And I don't want listeners to think that I was making a dig at autobiographical comics or memoir comics. I'm not. It was just more of an observation than anything. Yeah, that we have just a lot of stuff out there. And, you talked about schools and art programs. Well, Tom Hart himself is an instructor. Mm-hmm. So this just makes perfect sense. So, yeah. We do have a lot of autobiographical comics. And if you want to learn how to do some of those, then definitely grab Tom Hart's new book. And I think that after that, both of us wanted to highlight something on page 326 in the humanoid section.
I am so excited by this book. It's really William Roy and Sylvain Dorage, Hedy Lamarr, An Incredible Life, The Inventor, the Icon, the graphic novel. And there's a full page spread plus a write-up. And Derek, this just looks so interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in fact, I didn't know much of anything about Hedy Lamarr until I read not too long ago, Penelope Baguiou's Brazen. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Pascal and I looked at it. Yeah. And it's a collection of stories of about, I don't know, anywhere from 5 to 8 pages long each of women throughout history who have made a difference, who were notable. And there was an entry on Hedy Lamarr. And of course, I knew that she was a movie star. I did not know that she was an inventor. And so that's something that I learned. And we get this in the subtitle, An Incredible Life, The Inventor, the Icon, the graphic novel.
And there was a recent documentary on her that I saw, and I cannot remember the title of, but it's specifically focused on her work as a scientist. I think it's on Netflix. Okay. And because I think I stumbled on it, and she's come up a lot in the last 4 or 5 years in children's books because so many children, speaking of trends, there's a big trend right now, obviously, in highlighting women from history, sort of recapturing their experiences, et cetera. And Hedy Lamarr, though, that was really fascinating because I was an old movie buff as a kid and was I thought I knew everything about every Hollywood actor, but this was a very well-kept secret. And I strongly recommend going over to Netflix if you haven't and searching for the Hedy Lamarr documentary. But this graphic novel looks wonderful. And if the cover is any indication of what's inside, I'm excited about the art style as well. So.
Yeah. Another thing we should mention that this is a part of Humanoid's new imprint, Life Drawn. And in fact, Pascal and I were talking about Life Drawn on the last Eurocomics episode, that this is a relatively new initiative from Humanoids to do more, let's say, real-to-life storytelling as opposed to fantasy or science fiction that Humanoids is primarily known for, although to be fair, they've done a lot of, let's say, more reality-based narratives as well, but not near as many as they've done in terms of the sci-fi fantasy stuff, the Jodorowsky, the Mobius material that they've put out. So this is a part of that initiative. Also a part of the Life Drawn initiative is another title that I'm really excited about in the Humanoid section. This is on that next page, 327. This is Vietnamese Memories, Book 2. This one's subtitled Little Saigon. Now, Vietnamese Memories 1 came out a few months ago, so now we get this second volume in Clement Balou's. I don't know if it's Balou or Baloup, Baloup. But this is also part of the Life Drawn series, and I'm looking forward to this coming out.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too.
Mm-hmm. I go to 328 now. Where do you go next?
I think that you're next, because then I move on to Lion Forge, but you want to talk about an interesting book. So
yeah, and this is from It's Alive, which is a small publisher that does reprints of really kind of classic but probably little known comics. And this one is Dunkirk, written by Paul S. Newman with art by Sam Glanzman. And It's Alive has done a number of things by Glanzman. And this deals with, of course, Dunkirk. And it says it features 3 main stories: Dunkirk, Channel Battle, and Last Leave. Plus, it has a backup story, One by Sea, and a 1-page story, A Most Deadly Air Raid, and another one, The First Aircraft Carrier. So this is Newman and Glanzman's take on World War II battles. So yeah, it seems quite notable and something that I may want to check out.
Good.
And then we get on to Lion Forge. And what in Lion Forge excites you?
Well, first of all, Lion Forge itself excites me because I'm so excited that we have a comics creator that really is actively growing itself. If you are at all involved in mentoring students who want to do publishing, you will know about Lion Forge because they are hiring a lot of interns and a lot of permanent employees right now, and they are growing their YA and children's series imprints. And this summer they announced Caracal, which will be the middle grade imprint, and it's really exciting to me that this is happening. But the ones that I wanted to point out first are on 332, the Roar series, their Roar imprint, which is ages 13 to 18. It's called there's a new series called Quincredible. And Quentin is a high school sophomore. He's looking to live his best life by moonlighting as a superhero. And I love that looking to live his best life. That's so 21st century. His power is invulnerability, and that's the only power he has. So it's kind of a fascinating, passive sort of thing. I can't wait to sort of see how this plays out. We have this series written by Rodney Barnes, and art is by Selena Espiritu and Kelly Fitzpatrick, who's been busy. Kelly Fitzpatrick must never take a break. And some of the images are just action shots or sketches of the characters. So, pretty much. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on with that. And that is it for me for today for Lion Forge, because some of no, that's not true. There's one other, we both like one of these, I think.
Water Snakes. This is on page
Water
334.
Snakes. Yeah, boy, that cover is enough to just get me to run right to the store.
Yeah, and this is by Tony Sandoval, both writing and art. And the art looks incredible. Mm-hmm. It really is.
It's so distinctive. And
it's part of the Magnetic collection, which has me wondering if this is yet another translation, because we know that Lion Forge has been doing a number of translations, both with their, if you want to call them, I guess, graphic novels, but also their individual series have been translations. And I think with their books, more time than not, those that are published under Magnetic or the Magnetic collection have been translation. But I don't know. It doesn't indicate if this is one or not.
Well, whatever it is, it looks fascinating as all get out. Yeah. And it basically, the solicitation is Mila is a solitary teenager ready to put another boring summer vacation behind her until she meets Agnes. And those people named Agnes, they're always interesting. An adventurous girl who turns out to be a ghost. And not just a regular ghost, but one carrying the essence of an ancient fallen king and a mouthful of teeth that used to be his guardian warriors. Just think about that sentence for a minute. And also, might I say, those of us who do a lot of work in YA literature Ghost girls are a current thing. They're everywhere, and have been for about the last 5 or 6 years, and everything from Friends with Boys to Anya's Ghost, and I could go on. And so this is another one of those interesting texts. And one of the illustrations, Derek, is a picture of a beautiful fox in watercolor, and I'll be interested to see how that plays out. But actually, the art that is on page 335 from the series is creepy, but I even like it. So, it's creepy, fascinating, like Neil Gaiman creepy as opposed to like just horror creepy. This is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I need this book, and I think I'll probably try and teach it once I've had a chance to read it through. Maybe next year I'll teach it because it looks really interesting. I think my students would love it.
And I think next both of us go to page 342, right?
Right. This
and
is
you have
Mariner
one on,
books.
Yeah, you have one on there, the Mariner book, that kind of fell through the cracks for me. I didn't see that just because of what's right next to it. I was paying attention to that.
Well, let me pull back up to it because I got distracted, which is not surprising. It's me. Let me see. Oh, yeah, this is part of it. Comics and Confessions by Ariel Scragg. And I have read all of Ariel Scragg's work. I have written on Ariel Scragg. She is the woman who in the 1990s, while she was a student at Berkeley High School, every summer wrote up a graphic account of her school year and had those published by Slave Trade Comics, I think, right? Slave Labor Comics, sorry. And this solicitation is...
Slave Trade Comics.
I know. Can you believe me? I can't even believe me. Ariel Scragg, a critically acclaimed memoirist and screenwriter, takes us on a painfully funny tour of her formative years from her childhood in Berkeley to her mid-20s in Brooklyn, exploring what it means to connect to others when you don't yet know who you are, when you want to be part of it, but the it changes daily. And the reason why I am so interested in this book is because Scragg is actually one of the few authors who wrote books while she was a child. They were published unedited. And now she's going back to that time period as an adult and writing about it from an adult perspective. So the ability to compare sort of what her teenage self thought of herself to what her adult self is thinking of herself is just so exciting to be as a scholar. In fact, for me, this is a scholarly article. So I can't wait to get a hold of this.
Yeah, it does sound exciting, and I'm a fan of Scragg's as well. But I just completely overlooked this.
Well, it's what the problem, Derek, is that when you get to this part of the catalog, everything is kind of crammed in together, and if you're not careful, it's easy to miss things. You've already mentioned a couple things that, like Dunkirk, I didn't even see, and so there you go.
Mm. Now, I guess what kept me from noticing part of it is the other solicit on that page, which is right across from part of it. And this is under Mosaic Press, A History of Women Cartoonists by Mira Falardeau. And now this is listed in the catalog as a reference book. And, when Previews or Diamond made changes to the Previews catalog several months ago, they kind of mixed, no, they didn't kind of, they definitely mixed their prose works in with their comics, which, I don't know, I'm not too thrilled with. Some of their other changes, okay, that's fine, but mixing the prose with the comics seemed a little confusing at times. But they do indicate when something is, let's say, a prose work, or in this case, they call it a reference work. And it says that Falardeau looks at the work of great women artists and their experiences in the industry to reveal advice and positive encouragement for future cartoonists. Illustrated by cartoons and artwork from many of the best in the field, the book also asks serious questions about why there have been so few women cartoonists in the field of visual humor, and if the digital age is opening more opportunities for female humorists. So, she's an art historian, Falardeau, and I would be interested, and maybe Gwen, you could do this as well with me, of having Falardeau on the show to talk about this.
Yeah, that would be exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who are working in this field, especially Margaret Galvin, who is now a professor at the University of Florida, and she's doing incredible work in underground women, especially lesbian women, comics creators too. So there's a lot of good research that's going on right now. And yeah, I would love that. That would be exciting.
Yeah. On the next page is also something that's quite exciting, and this is the second mention of the Beatles that you referred to earlier, Gwen, and this is under NBM, and it's called The Beatles in Comics, and it's a hardcover, and apparently it has a variety of different writers, but the sole artist, according to this solicit, is Michel Mabel. And it says the complete illustrated history of the Beatles from their formation through the Beatlemania phenomena all the way through to their breakup. We see how they evolved along and amplified the uproar of the 60s, became politically and socially active, and achieved a lasting impact unparalleled in pop music. Chapters combine texts and comics for complete information presented in a fun way. The fact that this is an NBM book impresses me. I've seen some solicits for other Beatles-oriented comics by, I don't know, publishers I'd never heard of before, and I was a little suspicious of the quality. But the fact that this is coming out from NBM, I would feel comfortable definitely committing to discussing this text. And, if it's one in translation, this may be something else that Pascal and I can discuss on a future year, or we could discuss on a regular review show, because we've looked at translation works before. But it's the Beatles. Hey.
Exactly.
And as you said, you and I are on board for about anything Beatles related when it comes to comics.
We are. And I'll just say the word Beatles one more time in case there is a drinking game going on. There you go.
Okay, and I think next, both of us go to page, 355?
Yes, for Che, A Revolutionary Life.
This is under Penguin Books.
Under Penguin Books, John Lee Anderson, Jose Hernandez, and a graphic biography. I'm really excited about that.
This is interesting in that 2 days before I was looking through the catalog, I got an email from a publicist at Penguin telling me about this book and asking if we wanted to discuss it or even interview the creators on the Comics Alternative. And I'm definitely interested in this in one form or another, dealing with the book on the show. I just haven't responded to that publicist yet. So this is good. I would definitely be on board for this.
Great.
Now, I have several other things in the main section. I believe you're about done, right?
I am, but that's okay because you picked things that were really interesting to me. I just was really selective this time, and I knew that you'd pick lots of things. So it's not that I'm disinterested in the things you picked. I just kind of, for one thing, for instance, just in Ani Press, there's a lot of issues 7, 8, 9 out of their series that most people already know about. So I didn't dwell on those, but you've picked up a lot of things that are interesting to talk about. So let's just go ahead and do that.
Okay, on page 357, and this is under Rebellion 2000 AD. It's not often that I mention something under Rebellion 2000 AD, but this seemed really interesting to me. Of course, a lot of things that Rebellion 2000 AD do are interesting. I just don't mention them on the preview show. But this is written by Guy Adams, or maybe Guy Adams, I guess, could be, with art by Jimmy Broxton, and this is called Hope. It's an alternate post-war 1940s Los Angeles where black magic is a fact of life. Mallory Hope is a private detective, again, a detective crime story, haunted by his past and by the occult forces he uses. That seems to be a theme for this previews episode.
And that's why you're doing all the talking.
Yeah. Crime and horror mixed together.
Yeah.
It says, when a new case involving a missing boy reminds him of his own lost child, Hope is determined to find him. He soon discovers all is not what it seems, and dark powers lurk behind the lights of Hollywood. Typical noir, but with horror. A stylish new supernatural detective noir mixing magic and the movies. So that seemed interesting to me, and I probably will check that out. Another thing I wanted to mention is on the next page, 358, and this is from the always reliable great comics publisher Retrofit, or Retrofit Big Planet. And this is Our Wretched Town Hall. This is by Eric Kostiuk Williams. And we've discussed Williams's work in the past when we've done spotlights on Retrofit Big Planet comics. So this is Eric Kostiuk Williams's latest book. It says, how would you interpret the hammy Lenthian dream about your ex. Has your houseplant been judging you the entire time? Will you bother grappling with the ethics of your woke? But Machiavellian workplace-related revenge? Does anyone care if you don't make it out of the party? How do you go forward when everything's moving backward? Town hall's in session, and we've got lots to talk about. So, when we've discussed Williams's comics in the past, they've been really wild, and from this solicit, it seems that we can expect no change in terms of the wildness. So that's interesting. I'm definitely on board for anything coming from Retrofit.
And then next, wow, that sounds like a really interesting book, actually, Derek. This one on 360.
Yeah, this is coming out from Self-Made Hero, another favorite of ours, and written by David Hine, always freaky, with art by Mark Stafford. Lip Hook, a tale of, I'm assuming this is supposed to be rural unease, but the way it's spelled is Ruaral.
But on the picture of the book, it is spelled just like rural. So I think that must be a typo from.
Yeah. Because otherwise, I don't know what that refers to. What kind of unease? It says somewhere in Britain, in the British Isles, at the end of the neglected road, there is a village called Lip Hook.
I believe that.
Yeah. For its inhabitants, the village is more than the end of the road. It's the end of the world. Beyond it, there is nothing but mist-shrouded marshland. Few travelers take the road to Lip Hook, but one foggy night, a car speeds perilously toward the village. The driver is a dangerously beautiful woman. The passenger, a man with a gunshot wound and a suitcase containing a treasure he has risked his life for.
He better be dangerously handsome, I'm just saying.
That's right. Yeah, if she's dangerously beautiful.
That's right. I want equality.
Let's be equal here. The two fugitives seek shelter in the Hanged Man Inn, where the woman persuades the innkeeper to accept payment in kind. As days pass and the woman extends her services to more of Lip Hook's men, among them the village priest, a false faith grips the community, and soon reason, logic, and humanity begin to disappear. It seems creepy, especially given the cover, which I think is great.
The cover looks like what I feel like when I have a sinus infection.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, you basically have a woman, and she has what looks like a mask on, but it seems like whatever it is that's on her face is coming from her nose.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what you're referring to. But, you can always count on David Hine for some creepy storytelling, I think. And I like that.
And you like him yet again on page 361, right?
Yeah, in 361, David Hine is one of the writers, or I guess the main writer, of the latest issue of Meanwhile, and this is coming from Soaring Penguin Press. And, Meanwhile is one of those series that I haphazardly read, in other words, every now and again. But, it's a collection of different stories. And so it's pretty good stuff. So if you're not familiar with Meanwhile, just know that the issue number 9 is going to be coming out in 2 or 3 months. Something else that I think is even more interesting, but I'm not going to get it because they're always expensive, is this is another book from Sunday Press Books, and this is on page 363. Thimble Theater and the Pre-Popeye Cartoons of E.C. Segar. Or Seeger. And, we know of Seeger primarily through Popeye, right? I mean, that's what really put him on the map for many people. But this book seems interesting in that this is the pre-Popeye Thimble Theater stuff. Because, Popeye got his start in Thimble Theater. But this is Thimble Theater before Popeye. And I say I probably won't get it because what Sunday Press Books does is they put out these really nice oversized hardbound editions. And they're so nice. They're expensive. I can't afford them. If I could, I would. But there you go. So Thimble Theater and the pre-Popeye cartoons of E.C. Segar. And the only other thing I have in the regular section before we get to the manga part is on page 390. And let me get there. I listed this because I'm not familiar with the publisher. This is the first time I've seen this publisher, and this is Zuiker Press, Zuiker Press. Have you heard of them? No,
and I did read through the the solicits, and I thought they were kind of weird.
Yeah, it's two books that seem okay. Well, they seem fairly topical or kind of like helping young readers in some way. You know, one is called Click, A Story of Cyberbullying, and this is by Alexandra Phillips with art by Gary Leach. And then the second one that's listed under this press is Mend, A Story of Divorce, written by Sophia Recca and art by, again, Gary Leach. And so Click is a story of cyberbullying, yeah. And then in Mend, it's the story of a 14-year-old who has to deal with her parents' divorce.
Well, you know, I'm looking at the publisher's site right now, and it says it's a publishing company that champions the voice of young authors. We are an issue-based literary house. All of our authors have elected to tell their personal stories and be ambassadors of their cause. Their mission, as well as ours, is that readers will learn from the pain and heroics of our authors and find hope, change, and happiness in their own lives. And I'm just kind of clicking on this because I'm curious about where this is located. I don't know. I would want to read a lot more about this. Okay. So Anthony is, he was the creator of TV's CSI franchise. And his wife was a veteran teacher at Blue Ribbon Schools in Las Vegas.
Are they the publishers?
Yeah, they are the publishers. And let's see where they're based out of. They're distributed by Simon and Schuster. But I don't know.
Is it a relatively new press?
I'm trying to find. It must be, because obviously they're probably using the money from his empire to fuel this.
You know, it just strikes me that there is a theme, or at least a tone, with this press. In that
it's 2017, Derek. So it's 2017.
Okay. So yeah, so they're relatively new, and you know, part of the tone, I guess, is at least according to these two solicits, texts that are geared toward younger readers and problems that they may face, right? You know, divorce and cyberbullying.
But it sounds very didactic, like online. Didactic. Actually, when you look at their catchphrase is spotlights young writers with heartfelt stories that enlighten and inspire, which to me is teach. So I would really go with this with a big grain of salt. So I'll have to, now you realize I'm going to have to get one of these.
Yeah, and just to see what it's about. Okay, so that's all I have in the regular section of the previews catalog. Before we get to manga, I don't think you have anything in manga.
No, but you do. You have a lot. So,
well, I have a few things. And the first thing I have in the manga section is in the Viz Media part, and this is on page 417, Ron and the Gray World, and this is by Aki Iri, and this is volume 1. Little Ron Uruma can't wait to grow up and become a sorceress like her mother, so with the help of a magical pair of sneakers, she transforms into an adult and sets off. Her father and older brother, Jin, try to keep her safe at home, but Ron is determined to advance her powers and have adventures of her own. And the art that I see here is one of the things that grabbed my attention. We have the cover of the book, and then we have just, I guess, a sample, either part of a page, or this could even be a 2-page spread. And so Erie's art does seem interesting, and this may be something that maybe Shay and I can discuss in a future episode of the manga series.
Yeah.
And then after that, I go to page 426, and this is in the Dimpa Books section. And I have to tell you, I'm not familiar with Dimpa Books as a publisher of manga, but they have one title that the art especially got my attention, and this is by Hiroyuki Asada. It's called Pez, and it's spelled like the candy, P-E-Z. It says, Pez is on a journey. She is out searching for a place where there is life and society is bustling. The world she knows now is far from that. It is a cold and lonely place. And even with her partner Deco at her side, she knows that there isn't much left for her in this place. But along her way, she runs into places and people who remind her of what life used to be. They also give her motivation and hope for what she would like life to be once more. So I'm not exactly sure what would be going on in this solicit. I think it sets a tone more than it does a setting that you can visualize. But, I'm interested in seeing what this is about, and especially since I've never read anything by Denpa Books before.
Yeah, I like the drawing on the cover. I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Now, my next couple of mentions are from a publisher I'm very familiar with, and that is Kodansha Comics. They always do great stuff. And, one of the things I've been doing, Shay and I several months ago discussed the first volume of their Kodansha's kind of repackaged Battle Angel Alita series. And there have been, or at least will be, 5 volumes of that coming out. And I've been getting the individual volumes as they've come out. So I'm not going to get this, but for those who may not have any volumes of Battle Angel Alita, and these are nice hardbound editions that Kodansha has been putting out. If they don't have them, but they're interested in Battle Angel Alita, which is a great series by Yukito Kushiro, then they can get this, the Battle Angel Alita Complete Series box set. So this has all 5 volumes of this classic cyberpunk manga. But you're going to have to dish out for it because this box set is retailing for $179.94. So also solicited on that page is the Battle Angel Alita movie tie-in edition, which, I'm not going to get, but, anyway, there's that. And then on the next page is, I said earlier about Wandering Island. Shay and I reviewed the first volume of that, and we've been eagerly anticipating the second volume, which is finally about to come out. Same thing for this next title I'm about to mention. This is on page 430, and this is Die Vergelder, Volume 2 by Hiroki Samura. And Shay and I did discuss the first volume of Die Vergelder maybe about 2 years ago, I think it was, 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And so now we finally get Samura's second volume that's about to come out. So I'm glad about that. And then the very last thing I have in the manga section, which is also the very last thing I have in the September Previews catalog, is on page 435, and this is in the 7 Seas Entertainment section. And this is Captain Harlock, the Classic Collection, Volume 3. Shay and I discussed the first volume of Captain Harlock Classic Collection not quite a month ago. And I think it was maybe 1 or 2 months ago, Volume 2 of the Classic Collection was solicited. Now we get Volume 3. I may be mistaken, but this may be the last of the Captain Harlock series that they're going to be reprinting. So, and Captain Harlock is Leiji Matsumoto's kind of a classic manga sci-fi adventure narrative where you have Captain Harlock, who is a space pirate going through space. He is, but he's a space pirate that in many ways is like Robin Hood because he's a pirate, yes. So he is an outlaw and a scoundrel by many, or for many, but he ends up fighting for the weak and those who are disempowered. So
don't worry, Derek, there are actual Tarbox pirates in the past. So, and there's an island in Maine called Tarbox Island where they used to hide stuff. So there you go.
Arr.
Now you know.
Arr.
Yeah, see, Tarbox. It worked out really well. It was a good name for a pirate. So.
Gwen, listeners have come to expect longer episodes with our preview shows, and we didn't disappoint. We've been going on for just a little over 2 hours now, and we covered a lot of territory.
We have, and lots of young women who are going to take on the world, apparently. That seems to be the major theme for today's solicits. So.
Yeah, well, 2 things. One, women who are going to take over the world, and crime horror.
Right. So that was today. And there was some overlap even. So yay.
Yeah. Gwen and I covered a lot of territory in the September Previews catalog. We always enjoy going through previews, even though it may be an episode on a monthly basis that takes us a little more time to get through, but I think it's worth it. It's always fun. And also these are, I think, our most popular shows for the most part, in terms of the download numbers. People seem to really get off on our preview shows more than our regular review shows.
Well, again, then let me just say Beatles. You're welcome.
Yeah. So you can bet your bottom dollar that every single thing that we've mentioned on this previews episode is going to be at great discounts at the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. That's right. Go to dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find a whole slew of specials, and you can count on those every single month. And again, everything we mentioned will be at great discounts. You can bet. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let me and Gwen know what you thought about our September preview show. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can contact us the old-fashioned way by picking up that telephone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. You can contact us by email at 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can get in touch with us individually. I'm Gwen at comicsalternative.com. Derek, how can folks reach you?
At Derek at comicsalternative.com. You know, you can also reach us via social media. We have platforms on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we occasionally post on the blog, simply by going to our website, which is, again, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. Well, this was a lot of fun, Derek. Thanks for having me on board this month.
Yeah, and Gwen, I really do appreciate you filling in. As listeners may suspect, Paul has he's kind of been away, and we will explain more in a future episode. But until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gwen. See you soon.
Hey, what happened?